Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I remember the moment I opened my banking app as clearly as if it were playing back in slow motion. Thumbprint scan, loading circle, the usual check-in before payday. I wasn't even looking for anything in particular. I just picked up groceries, figured I'd do a quick glance, see if anything posted late. Nothing dramatic, nothing to brace for. And then I saw it. 8 transactions in 2 days, all unfamiliar, all maxing out the one card I barely ever used. Plane tickets, a designer handbag, some electronics store I'd never even heard of. I blinked. I checked the last 4 digits. Yes, it was mine. My name on it, my account, my limit. And it was blown to hell. At first I thought maybe it was fraud, some random stranger who got lucky and ran wild before I could catch it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Not this time. Because the moment my eyes landed on the purchase at the Silk Boutique, a tiny little luxury place my sister Lindsay had posted about on Instagram just last week, showing off a pair of obnoxiously expensive red heels and tagging it "Retail therapy always hits different when you're stressed." I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't some random thief. It was her, again. I didn't react right away. I sat there dead still on the edge of my bed, hearing my neighbor's lawnmower buzz like a distant fly through the window screen, while inside my head everything was locked in that suspended hum of disbelief. Because it wasn't just the money, it was the fact that it had happened before. Not like this, not this big, but always enough to hurt, and always brushed under the rug. That card had been tucked away in my kitchen drawer, behind old batteries and expired coupons, in an envelope marked emergency. But I knew exactly what happened. She had been over last week, looking for a USB charger or some crap like that, digging through drawers while pretending to look for something else. She must have snapped a picture of the card, front and back, and let it sit in her phone until temptation outweighed caution. And of course, she probably assumed it wouldn't matter, that I'd grown, maybe cry, but ultimately pay it, like always. What broke me wasn't the purchases. It wasn't the total, which was just over $4,000, by the way. It wasn't even the casual recklessness of her actions. It was the text she sent the next morning. It popped up while I was brushing my teeth, like a slap across the face, dressed up with emojis and fake charm. "Hey, don't freak out. Mom said you'll just pay it off like always." That was the moment something snapped in me. Not like an outburst, not like yelling or throwing something. It was cleaner than that. Colder, more focused. Something in me straightened its back and said, "Okay, you want to play games? Let's play." Because it wasn't just Lindsay's betrayal. It was my mother's smug, offhanded validation of it. The same pattern playing out again and again like clockwork. Lindsay makes the mess, Mom explains it away, and I foot the bill, both literally and emotionally. You'd think a grown woman, me, 38 years old, with a full-time job, her own apartment, and a retirement account, would have figured out how to say no before now. And I have in small ways, but family has a way of rewiring your boundaries. My mother has always had this way of making me feel like Lindsay was the one who needed saving, while I was the one who owed it to the family to be the savior. It didn't matter how many times I stayed late at work to cover rent when Lindsay couldn't pay her half of the shared lease we used to have. It didn't matter how many calls I fielded from landlords or pawn shops or bounced checks. I was the responsible one, which in our family just meant I was the designated cleanup crew. And the worst part? For years, I bought into it. I didn't like it, but I played along, because that's what daughters are supposed to do, right? Keep the family together, don't rock the boat, don't make Mom cry. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't send a long-winded, heartbroken text. I didn't call and scream into the phone. I screenshotted every transaction. I logged everything, the dates, the times, the locations. I called the bank, not to cancel the card or file a fraud claim, but to set up a secondary alert system. I wanted eyes on this thing. I wanted paper trails. I wanted them watching every move. And then I waited. Because if Lindsay and Mom thought this was going to be like all the other times, where I bite my tongue and eat the debt and smile at Thanksgiving like everything's fine, they were about to learn something new about me. I've spent nearly 40 years being the good one, the peacemaker, the fallback plan, not anymore. This time, I wanted them to feel it, not just the guilt, which never sticks, but the shock of it. The cold exposure of seeing, in black and white, what they've done and how far they've gone. I wanted the lie to unravel itself, right in the middle of one of those perfect little family dinners where Lindsay shows up late and Mom pretends not to notice. And I bring the wine and smile because someone has to. I wanted them to be unprepared, off guard. So when the bank asked if I wanted to authorize an account review call to the primary contact, I made sure to say yes. And I made sure the number on file for the family account was Mom's house line, not her cell. The landline, the one that rings right next to the dining table. This Sunday's dinner was going to be different. But before we get to that, let me ask you something. If someone in your family did what Lindsay did, if they stole from you, laughed in your face, and expected you to clean it up like always, what would you do? Would you let it slide to keep the peace? Or would you make them finally look at the mess they made? Because I've got to tell you, when you've been the responsible one your whole life, revenge doesn't come loud or fast. It comes quietly, precisely, with a statement in the mail and a phone call during dinner. And trust me, I was just getting started. It's strange how easily the patterns of your life settle into you like a second skin, so familiar that you stop noticing the itch until someone pulls at the seam and suddenly everything burns. That's what this was for me. Not just a credit card fraud incident, not even just another betrayal from my sister, but a wake-up call that shook loose years of silent sacrifices and unanswered questions I had learned to ignore for the sake of family, for the illusion of peace, and for the shallow approval of a mother who had always looked at me as the safety net, rather than the daughter with needs of her own. In the days that followed Lindsay's smug little text and the financial ambush that had drained nearly every usable dollar from my backup card, I found myself walking through memories the way people walk through haunted houses, not sure which door would creak open to reveal a new ghost of resentment I had tried to bury. I thought about the first time I paid one of her bills, back when we were both in our 20s and she had just moved in temporarily after losing her job, a period that extended into 9 months of unpaid rent, my groceries disappearing, and bathroom counters permanently covered in her makeup. I remembered the way she'd pout during fights, how she'd burst into tears if I tried to bring up boundaries, and how, without fail, Mom would call me afterward, not her, never her, with a soft voice that carried a sharpened edge, saying things like, "She's going through a rough time," or "You know she looks up to you," or the ever-popular, "You're the big sister, she just needs a little help." That phrase, "a little help," had been used to justify everything from stolen clothes to crashed cars. And every time I tried to pull away, to assert that I was tired or broke or simply unwilling, I was met with the same emotional calculus. Rachel equals reliable. Therefore, Rachel can afford to give a little more. And Lindsay, the fragile flower, the struggling artist, the just figuring things out golden child, was never held accountable for more than a few crocodile tears and a vague promise to do better next time. And I, too tired to argue, too guilt-ridden to draw hard lines, let it happen again and again, until now. I didn't go to work the day after discovering the charges. I took a personal day and made a list instead. I wrote down every instance I could remember, every unpaid favor, every financial bailout, every check I wrote with clenched teeth and an aching stomach. I tallied the totals, I looked through emails, old texts, and photos. I compiled receipts like a prosecutor building a case, not because I wanted to press charges, but because I needed, for the first time in my life, to look the full truth of it in the face without flinching or apologizing for feeling hurt. And then I called the bank again, not to cancel the card, not yet. That would have been too easy, too quick, too clean. What I wanted was visibility. I spoke to a representative named Tom, who, to his credit, didn't flinch when I explained that I suspected a family member had stolen and used my card, and that I wasn't ready to report it as fraud, not because it wasn't, but because I wanted the pattern to play out. I asked about setting up an alert system, real-time notifications to a secondary number, record keeping, identity tracking. I wanted a digital paper trail as meticulous as the one in my journal. Tom, after a brief pause, said quietly, "We can flag it for monitoring and call the primary account holder if suspicious activity continues. Do you want that call to go to you or someone else?" I didn't hesitate. "Someone else," I said. "The listed emergency contact is my mother. Keep it that way, just make the call during business hours. And if possible, avoid voicemail." That evening, I visited Mom's house under the pretense of checking in. I brought her favorite bakery cookies, chatted about the weather, and pretended I didn't know that Lindsay had been there earlier that day. I spotted the open drawer where my emergency envelope had lived. The paper slightly crumpled, the envelope ripped at the top in a way that said careless fingers had rushed to open it. I made tea. I asked about Sunday dinner. "Just us girls," Mom said, beaming. "It'll be nice to sit down and talk." I smiled and said, "Yeah, it really will." In that moment, I felt a strange calm. Not happiness. This wasn't a victory lap, but clarity. The kind that only comes when you finally accept that the roles you've been assigned were never your choice. And the only way to change the story is to step completely out of character. Because Lindsay hadn't just stolen my credit. She had played a part in a bigger script that had been running for years. One in which my exhaustion was used as fuel for other people's comfort. And Mom, whether she admitted it or not, had always been the director, subtly nudging me to stay quiet, smooth things over, carry the weight, and never, ever make a scene. But I was done smoothing, done carrying, and the scene was coming whether they liked it or not. As I got into my car and drove home, I pictured the dinner table, pot roast, wine glasses, maybe some polite bickering about traffic or politics. I pictured the phone ringing right as Lindsay launched into another story about how hard life is for people like her. I imagined the color draining from Mom's face as she heard the automated voice confirm the account charges, each one matching an item Lindsay had been bragging about all week. I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. I was designing it. And this time, no one was going to hang it around my neck and call it kindness. There's something eerily theatrical about family dinners, especially in families like mine, where surface smiles do all the heavy lifting and truth sits quietly under the table like an unwanted guest nobody wants to acknowledge. The table is set, the roast is in the oven, the wine is breathing politely on the counter, and everyone walks in rehearsed and shiny, like actors who've been playing their roles for decades, terrified that breaking character will mean the collapse of the whole production. That Sunday evening, as I pulled into my mother's driveway, a bottle of red in my hand and a script in my head, I knew I was stepping into a show that was about to go wildly off book. And for once, I wasn't there to play my usual role. I wasn't there to fix, to smooth, or to smile through clenched teeth while everyone else carved up my piece like it was part of the damn meal. I was there to watch the curtain drop. The living room smelled like cinnamon and roast beef, two smells that had no business being in the same air, but always were at my mother's house. The table was set with the same floral plates she's used since we were kids. The ones she swears are vintage, though I'm almost certain she bought them at a clearance sale in the early 90s. Lindsay was already there, sitting on the couch in a velvet green top that looked suspiciously like something she couldn't afford 3 weeks ago. She was scrolling on her phone, one leg crossed high, sipping wine like it hadn't been purchased by the very person she had just robbed. When she looked up and saw me, her smile was too wide, too staged. And for a moment, I almost believed she thought she was untouchable. "Hey, Rach," she chirped, like nothing had happened, like $4,000 was just a hiccup, a casual inconvenience that would blow over once the adults calmed down. "You look tired. Long week?" Her voice had that syrupy tone she used whenever she was baiting me, trying to feel out just how angry I was and whether she needed to pretend to be sorry. But I wasn't angry, not in the way she expected. I was composed, icy, and deliberate. And nothing throws someone like Lindsay off balance more than calm where they expected fire. I poured myself a glass of wine and took a seat at the table just as Mom emerged from the kitchen, flushed and smiling, holding the roast like it was a peace offering for a war she refused to admit was happening. We went through the motions. Salads passed around. Soft laughter about the neighbors' overgrown hedges. Lindsay talking about how hard it is to find authentic Italian boots online, as though that struggle deserves sympathy. Every time she opened her mouth, I saw the charges flash in my head, the boutiques, the flight to Denver she never mentioned, the hotel room that definitely wasn't a Motel 6. And every time I felt the urge to speak, to call her out mid-bite, I reminded myself that it wasn't my voice that needed to deliver this one. It was the phone. Right around the time the plates had been cleared and Mom was dishing out pie, the house phone rang. That old beige cordless that sits on the sideboard like a relic from a simpler time. It never rings. Nobody calls it anymore except telemarketers and old friends of my grandmother who don't realize she passed 10 years ago. But today, it rang on time, exactly as scheduled. I kept my face neutral, my fork still, my eyes fixed on the pie crust like it held the meaning of life. Mom answered with the usual polite tone she reserved for calls that might be church-related. But as soon as the voice on the other end identified itself as the security department from my bank, her posture changed. Her back straightened, her mouth pinched slightly, and the color drained from her face in slow motion, as though someone had opened a hidden valve and let the warmth out. She turned toward me with a look of confusion, an unspoken question in her eyes, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "They're saying there have been multiple unauthorized purchases on your account," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "High-value items, travel, electronics, luxury goods. They're reading out the charges." Lindsay froze. I watched her body lock up, her smile vanish mid-smirk, her eyes darting between us like she was calculating how fast she could get out of the room. I sipped my wine, leaned back slightly and said, "Oh, that must be from the card I keep for emergencies. The one I haven't used in months. The one that was stolen." My voice was calm, level, almost bored. Lindsay made a sound, something between a cough and a scoff, but didn't speak. She didn't have time, because Mom, still holding the phone, began to repeat the items aloud, as if hearing them again would make them make sense. 2 plane tickets, a boutique clothing store in the city, a laptop, several meal deliveries from upscale restaurants. She trailed off. Her eyes landed on Lindsay, then on the velvet top, the manicured nails, the new phone case. Slowly, the pieces began to arrange themselves in her head. Not just the financial puzzle, but the larger one, the history, the pattern, the years of quiet collusion. "You said you'd never do this." Lindsay's voice was shrill now, breaking through the silence like a snapped string. "You said you wouldn't say anything." She was standing now, fists clenched, voice rising in panic. "I didn't say anything," I replied, tilting my head just enough to meet her eyes. "The bank did." Mom stared at Lindsay, the horror settling in behind her eyes like cement, and for once there was no soft excuse on her lips, no quick deflection or gentle scolding. There was just the raw, unfiltered truth of it, loud and unignorable, ringing through the kitchen with the residue of every lie she had chosen to believe. I stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the door. My voice, when I turned back, was clear and sharp enough to slice through the tension. "I'm done playing the fool in this family," I said. "I warned you not to push me. You thought I wouldn't fight back because I never have before, but you forgot. Quiet doesn't mean weak, and kindness doesn't mean blind." And as I stepped out into the evening air, I didn't feel victorious or vindicated. I felt something colder, something final, because sometimes the truth doesn't free you. Sometimes it just burns the last rope holding a broken bridge together. And that night, it burned clean through. The strange thing about exposing the truth, especially a truth that's been kept quiet for years to preserve appearances, is that when the walls finally come down, they don't collapse in some dramatic explosion or sudden fury like people expect. Instead, they crack slowly, soundlessly, In a way that feels more intimate, the sound, more haunting than satisfying, as though every lie ever told in that house was still clinging to the wallpaper, refusing to go down without dragging something with it. That's exactly how it felt the day after that dinner, when my phone remained eerily silent, when no apologetic call or explanation or even denial came through from my mother or my sister, and I realized that what I had done wasn't just reveal Lindsay's theft. It had cracked the carefully engineered myth of our family, the one where everything bad could be spun as a misunderstanding, a phase, a temporary lapse that would work itself out if only the responsible one took care of it. For the first time in years, I didn't reach out. I didn't send a follow-up message, didn't ask how Mom was processing it, didn't offer to explain further or comfort anyone through the wreckage. I simply let the silence stretch, let it hang heavy, because I had learned that sometimes silence is the only way to be heard when your voice has been dismissed for too long. And maybe, just maybe, they were finally hearing it now. The years of disappointment, the exhaustion, the quiet hurt I had masked with politeness and responsibility. It wasn't until 3 days later that Mom showed up at my apartment, unannounced and visibly shaken, carrying a grocery bag like she was still clinging to the rituals that once kept our relationship superficially intact. She looked older, smaller somehow, and for a moment I saw in her eyes not just the confusion of a parent trying to make sense of her daughter's choices, but the dawning awareness that she had played a role in something she could no longer explain away. She didn't start with an apology, and I didn't expect one. Instead, she sat down slowly, placed the bag on the counter, and asked, "Was all of that true?" The question was almost childlike, as though she were hoping I might say no, that it had all been a mistake, a misreading, something exaggerated or misinterpreted. But I didn't flinch. I met her gaze and nodded, not coldly, but with the calm certainty of someone who had already relived the evidence more times than she cared to admit. She began to talk, softly at first, about how hard things had been since Dad passed, how Lindsay always seemed to need more, how she thought she was helping by asking me to cover things here and there. She said she never knew it had gotten that bad, as if the accumulation of small favors and subtle manipulations could ever be anything but inevitable when they go unchecked for years. And though part of me wanted to scream, to demand why she never looked deeper, why she always defaulted to believing Lindsay's version of reality, I didn't. Because somewhere in her voice was something I hadn't heard before. Not just regret, but fear. Fear that maybe she had enabled something beyond her control. Fear that maybe she had sacrificed one daughter's peace for the illusion of protecting the other. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, and I could tell it was genuine. Not performative, not defensive, but the vulnerable plea of someone who finally saw the damage and had no idea how to fix it. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't have some grand plan for reconciliation. All I said was, make her face it. And I meant it. Not just the charges, but everything. The habit of lying, the thefts, the debts, the entitlement, the way she weaponized weakness to avoid accountability. Make her own it, I said. Not for me, for herself. Because if she doesn't now, she never will. Later that night, I got a message from Lindsay. It wasn't an apology. It was a short, bitter paragraph accusing me of humiliating her, of turning Mom against her, of overreacting and making a private matter public. She didn't deny taking the card, but she framed it as a desperate mistake, said she didn't know what else to do, that I had plenty and she had nothing. The entitlement oozed from every word, wrapped in a veil of self-pity so thin it was almost transparent. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent her an email with the full statement attached, itemized, annotated with dates, times, and screenshots. At the bottom, I included a choice: repay the full amount within 30 days, or I'd file a police report. I didn't threaten it with malice. I stated it like a fact, like a boundary that had been missing for too long. For a while, there was silence again. And then, a week later, I received a payment notification. Partial but significant. Not from Lindsay, but from Mom's account. A quiet compromise, a peace offering, or maybe just a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. But either way, it was movement, a start. I knew better than to trust it entirely. The patterns ran too deep. The roles had been worn into us like grooves in old wood, and change didn't come with one dramatic dinner or a single phone call. But it was something, a crack in the wall, a break in the story they'd been telling themselves for years. And even if it was just for a moment, I had finally stepped out of the script. I had stopped playing the part they wrote for me. I had rewritten the scene. Whether they would ever do the same, that was still uncertain. There's a quiet that comes after a storm, a kind of unsettling stillness where the dust hasn't quite settled, and even though the thunder has passed, your body stays tense, waiting for something else to break, something else to fall apart. Because that's how it always used to go, but this time, in the aftermath of everything that had happened, there was no second act of chaos, no dramatic explosion or attempt to rebuild. Just the hollow echo of old habits dying in silence and the weight of truths that could no longer be shoved back into the dark corners of our family narrative. I didn't hear from Lindsay again for weeks, and though part of me kept glancing at my phone, out of some lingering instinct to check, to brace for another excuse or accusation, I never got one. And perhaps that absence said more than any message ever could. Life returned to something resembling normal, though I suppose the word doesn't quite fit anymore. Because once you've cracked the foundation of how your family functions, nothing really goes back to what it was before, no matter how much everyone pretends otherwise. The daily routines were still there. Wake up, work, come home, eat, sleep. But there was an unfamiliar space in my chest where obligation used to live, and I realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was one argument or phone call away from being dragged into someone else's crisis. There was no panic in the pit of my stomach every time a family number popped up on caller ID, no tightening in my throat when Mom's name appeared in a text. There was, instead, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in far too long, peace sharp and unfamiliar, as if I had moved into a house where no one else knew the address. One afternoon, I ran into Mom at the grocery store, one of those accidental meetings that felt almost scripted by fate, just to see what we would do without the safety of pretense or preparation. She looked surprised to see me, not because she didn't expect me to shop there, but because I think, deep down, she didn't know how to look at me anymore without seeing what had changed. She smiled, tentative, brittle, and we stood there for a moment between the canned vegetables and the discount cereal aisle like strangers who shared a long, painful memory, but didn't know how to bring it up. We made small talk, weather, sales, a mention of an old neighbor's hip surgery. She didn't ask about Lindsay. I didn't mention the money. There was no apology, no awkward rehashing of the dinner or the fallout, just a mutual understanding wrapped in silence, the kind that comes when both parties know that trying to name what broke would only make it harder to keep the pieces from cutting deeper. Before she walked away, she looked at me for a long second and said, "I never meant to make you feel like you had to carry it all." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because what do you say to someone who's admitting something a decade too late, after the damage has already reshaped who you had to become? As for Lindsay, I heard through a mutual friend that she'd moved out of town. Something about a job opportunity or a boyfriend or some new, clean slate that she'd found in a city where no one knew her history. And maybe that's what she needed. Or maybe it was just another pattern on repeat. Another chapter in the same story, where she escapes consequences by changing scenery, hoping geography will do the work that introspection never did. I didn't wish her ill. I didn't feel angry anymore. What I felt, if anything, was something more complicated, a blend of grief and relief, the kind you feel when you finally walk away from a burning building you tried too long to save. The money was paid off in full, eventually. Most of it came from Mom, though I never asked where she got it or what deal was struck behind closed doors. It wasn't about the money anymore. It never really was. It was about the principle, the pattern, the refusal to keep being a character in someone else's dysfunctional story. And though I lost something in the process, connection, family dinners, that fragile illusion that we were all okay. I gained something far more valuable: the right to say no, the power to define my own peace, the strength to stop giving parts of myself to people who mistook my silence for permission. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, if there was a different way I could have handled things that didn't end with scorched bridges and awkward grocery store encounters. Maybe I could have sat them down calmly, explained the toll, tried one more time to make them see. But I had tried all of that before. I had written the emails, sent the long texts, poured out my heart in middle-of-the-night phone calls. And none of it changed anything. What changed things was truth. Sharp, cold, undeniable truth. Delivered not with rage but with strategy, not with screaming, but with silence and clarity. In the end, I didn't get a dramatic reconciliation or a tearful apology under soft lighting. I didn't get the warm, neat resolution we're taught to expect in family dramas, where everything is forgiven over coffee and hugs. What I got was honesty. Raw, uncomfortable, and incomplete. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe it has to be. So, Youll, if you've been watching and waiting for the moment where everything ties up neatly, where the villain repents, and the heroine is embraced and everyone learns a heartwarming lesson, I'm sorry to tell you that moment never came. But maybe the lesson isn't in the reunion. Maybe it's in the decision to walk away before the weight of other people's choices becomes your own undoing. Maybe family isn't about blood or duty or sacrifice. It's about who shows up for you when there's nothing to gain. And sometimes the people who share your name aren't the ones who deserve your forgiveness. Sometimes the person you need to forgive is yourself for waiting so long to stop paying the price for someone else's game. And sometimes the only closure you get is knowing that you finally closed the door.